And welcome to episode number 19 of the QCast, a very special, exciting episode today, as I have my good friend Pat Coleman with me, the executive editor of D3Sports.com. Pat, it is great to be here with you today. We've known each other a long, long time. I have so many things to ask you about. How the heck are you doing?
Wow. So the leadoff question is, how am I doing? And I guess the answer is, how serious do we want to answer that question? It's been a tough year, a year plus, obviously. I've been down here in this basement staring at this wall, or sometimes staring at it behind me for, 64 weeks or so. And we, really missed having a full football season and having a full basketball season, kind of trying to bask in the fact that as you and I are recording this, Division III baseball's championship game 2 is going on. So the baseball season is going to come to a normal conclusion. Gives me high hope, obviously, for the fall and for the winter. But yeah, it's been an adjustment. It was very, as you know, I have been through this a couple times with D3 hoops where I have to, just step back and try to recharge. And sometimes I can do that in an off season. And then this year was just an off season altogether. So I'm looking forward to the fall and seeing what normalcy looks like here in 2021.
See, you were worried about that first question and you just nailed it right there. So like we're totally in rhythm at this point. It is great to have you on here, and I've got a lot of things over a lot of topics to get through. I like to start though with the folks that join the show on just what I call their D3 story, because all of us that end up involved in Division 3, it didn't happen by happenstance,
Right.
it happens because we went to a Division 3 school, or we grew up in Worcester, Ohio, or there's something that drew us to it. And I want to make sure we start there. I mean, obviously, with everything you've done for Division 3, there's something that led into that. Walk us through, if you would, Pat, how this all kind of came about and how you became such a D3 guy.
Well, I think it started growing up. So I grew up here in Minnesota, and I've relocated here. Well, that's like 13 years ago. I came back basically, but I didn't understand obviously what Division 3 was, but I knew all of these schools that primarily are in the MIAC, right? The St. John's, the Augsburgs, the Hamlins, St. Olaf, Carleton. St. Thomas for at least 6 more innings is still a member of Division 3 going on that screen to my right. And but I didn't understand that there was that there was a bigger organization, or that there was anything organized at the NCAA level aside from what we all saw on our televisions in March. So I go off to college. As it turns out, in retrospect, I applied to 4 D3 schools. Ended up going obviously to one of them, to Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. And it was at a time where Catholic's men's basketball program was starting to get pretty good, first under Bob Valvano and then under Mike Lonergan. And, starting to just try to learn what this whole thing is all about, where, what these other schools are, who are these other teams in our region, who are we playing if we go to the NCAA tournament, that sort of thing. And this is like 1992, 93 or something like that. So there was no national coverage of D3 then. There was very little local coverage of Catholic in the area newspaper, because that's the Washington Post, and they considered themselves to not be a local paper of
Sure.
Washington, D.C., but be a national paper of record. So it was like they couldn't care about anything other than Maryland and Georgetown. So there wasn't really anything I could do about that then. It's the early 90s. There's no way to get this information. There are no tools to disseminate this information, even if I were thinking about trying to do so. But fast forward a couple of years, and I really have to credit Steve Ulrich, who was the commissioner of the Centennial Conference. That's
Right.
a bunch of schools kind of centered around Lancaster, PA, and in Maryland and that sort of thing, in the Philadelphia area. Because he had started a website, and he described it as like literally on a Macintosh in their office. And if like more than 6 or 7 people got on it at one time, it would crash and that sort of thing. But I was a sports information director at Catholic at the time. And this was very interesting to me, because I was trying to publish like our stuff on, just like basically our own network, or the Gopher. If anybody knows Gopher, I'm really dating myself. That is a a very much a text-based network of web-like files that you could go to. And so I was pushing information there for whatever reason. And then the web became possible. And so Steve was doing it, and I followed it for about a year and a half. And I noticed kind of going into the 97, 98 run up to that season that he wasn't updating his website. It's called Division III Basketball Online. And I just emailed him kind of out of the blue. We'd had conversations before. I was trying to get him to add women's basketball coverage, for example, without success. But I just kept, I guess I just nagged him at the right time, probably about the 1st of November of 97, and said, hey, are you planning on doing the website this year? And if not, are you interested in me taking it over? And in my head, it's like 5 minutes later, I get this email with an enthusiastic yes. And then the next email is like a bunch of file attachments. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to build a website. And I figured it would be, a couple hours a night, 2 or 3 nights a week. It would be much more updated than it was before. It would add women's basketball coverage, and everybody would be happy. And then I found out, oh my God, there's this huge network of not only Division III fans, but Division III sports information directors and coaches and people who wanted to send us information. It just kind of blew up. And I'm going to cut the next 2 minutes of this story because I've told it so many times, and you've heard it, and probably a bunch of the QCast audience has heard it. But that's kind of where we got now. We got a football site and a baseball site, and this wall behind me.
Yeah. And so, the team that you've led and been part of for 23, 24 years now has built this network that is much more than just hoops. Yeah. Obviously, there's football and baseball and soccer, et cetera. Now, today we're going to skew hoops because that's generally what I cover here. We may go into some of the other stuff, but I mean, I would just say this, Pat, as Division III fans owe you so much, because looking back then, there was no way for people in Division III to come together to one place to find information, to talk to each other. I can't even imagine how one would follow Division III without what you guys have built. As you take a step back all these years later, is it a little amazing what how it started versus where it is now? Does it blow your mind just a little bit?
Yeah, and I think, Bob, the community is the biggest thing. You touched on it there, but that is like the most unintentional consequence, I guess, of everything we've done. Of all the sleep that I've lost in 24 years, all the thinning of this hair, and all that sort of thing, right? Is that there was this network of Division III fans out there, and we just kind of put a message board on the site because in 1998 that was a thing that you do, right? But what I did not expect was to see, I expected to see people jawing at each other, and we had a lot of that, and we still have some of that. But I did not expect to see people coming together, people, who normally would be tailgating in opposite colors, still doing that, but at the same tailgate before the game. I obviously that's more of a football reference, right? But you get the idea. Having a beer together afterwards. That sort of thing. There is very much this community of NCAA Division III fans, and it kind of crosses sports in a lot of ways. Because I think, I think we can kind of put ourselves in with the NAIA folks and the D2 folks, hopefully also. We are just all people who really adore small college athletics, small college basketball, right. Basketball outside of the limelight, students who are student first, athletes second, or some combination of those two, right? They are not getting any extra benefits for participating in athletics. In a lot of cases, they are probably getting looked down on by their professors, by their fellow members of the student body. But they are just, they're in your classes, they're in your dorms, they're in your student government. They work at your campus radio station. They, may participate in the, in a drama production, that sort of thing. They are everybody. You are, everybody at a Division III school is kind of on the same level playing field. That's one of the things I love about it. I still talk about it being the highest level of pure amateur athletics because nobody's getting a scholarship and nobody's getting any extra for doing it.
And I definitely want to get deeper into the community piece of this. I want to first ask, just getting back to when you started this, coming out of, Steve Ulrich and the Centennial, did you have a vision for what this was? I mean, or was this like, I might do this for a year and, I might try to put a little content out. Did you have a thought that was longer term than 6 months, 12 months? What did you want this
Yeah.
to become in 1997?
Well, I don't know what in 1997 I wanted it to become, because I don't know that we ever knew what the possibility was of the web. Did we know that we were going to be able to, people were going to stream video, or everybody was going to have a handheld device in which they could communicate anything, including video and audio at any time? Yeah, if I had known that, I would be a very rich person and I'd be working for, I don't know, Apple or something like that. But I did definitely know that this was not just something I wanted to do for one season. I was a journalist by nature. I worked at Baseball Weekly. I worked at USA Today for a very long time, back when journalism was a thing that you could do and make a living at it. I was a journalist, right? And so I still have that. I still have that bug. I don't think at age 24 I could have envisioned the next 24 years. I always look at the day that we pushed the website live was the night that I came home from the hospital after our firstborn was born. So
Wow.
anytime I look at that budding 24-year-old who has been here at home for the last year because of campus being closed because of COVID, I just have this visual representation of everything that has gone on over the past 24 years. No, I don't think I thought it would be 24 years. I remember, I remember that at one point the NCAA was talking about in 2007, we will expand the fields from like 48 or 50 to 64 teams. And this is probably 2004 or something like that. And I'm thinking to myself, am I going to still be doing this in 2007? And now, of course, 2007 is 14 years ago. So, now I'm not necessarily looking for the exit. I'm looking for the next generation of people to kind of step up and help us Xers put this website together or do what it does next. But no, I had no idea that this is what it was going to be, and I had no idea it was going to be an all-encompassing thing that just kind of took over my life either.
The community, I want to get back to that, because I do think that is one of the lasting legacies of the network. I literally remember where I was when I found the message board. I was at work working at State Farm. And since I no longer work there anymore, I'll just tell you, yes, I was working at State Farm, checking out Division III stuff. So there. And I remember like just stumbling on, I don't know, the internet was new in 1997, 90. It hadn't been around that long at that point, right?
But you had it at your desk. Was it dial up or was it an actual network?
It was an actual network.
All
It was a
right.
work network. And somebody told me, I can't remember who it was, that, hey, there's a thing out there. And I navigated and I was trying to find it. I don't even know how I did find it, but I got to this page and there was some guy named Gregory Sager, and he was talking about the CCIW. And I'm like, wait a minute, somebody else knows about Elmhurst and North Park and Illinois Wesleyan. And some guy was talking. There weren't many people talking back to him at that point. But I remember thinking, holy cow, I've never seen something like this. So I like click a button and it says like create a username. And I don't know how I came up with Titan Q. I feel like you're calling into the sports talk radio show. Hey, let's go to Titan Q in Oak Lawn. So I call myself Titan Q, and now I get on there. And the amazing thing to me is over the next 5 years, that community of people on the CCIW board, the late Wheaton C. and Gregory Sager, and there was a gentleman named Hiker Jim and Kenosha Mark.
Yep.
We would all meet up at games. I remember being at Carthage games and Wheaton games where people reached out to each other to meet. Like, did you ever foresee when you put a message board out there, all the lifelong relationships and friendships that would be built from that?
Yeah, no, I had no idea. When you described it as being like talk radio, that is what I expected. And like when coaches would call me or email me to complain about it, which they did often during the 90s and the aughts, I would say, would you prefer it be a radio station? Would you prefer it be talk radio? Would you rather be, a D1 head coach? Because this is exactly all just the same thing, right? You should not read it. You should not listen to talk radio if these are the things that bother you, right? No, I mean, who knew, right? It is kind of like this precursor of social media, right? You know, where we all now got on Facebook, and maybe we're all getting off Facebook, right? But we all got onto this message board, and it became our social network. It was this kind of bridging the gap between, if you're a computer geek of the early 90s, the BBSs and the, you know, the dial-up things and things that I was too young to do but have heard about. I really am. I'm really too young to have done that, I promise. It kind of bridges that gap, though, right? It is a still even kind of just a standalone social network, and it's kind of, you know, it's not super high tech. It doesn't have a ton of features, but it has a ton of people, and people who want to talk about a very niche topic, and that's a great thing. I'm super glad that it turned out that way, and I cannot claim any credit for having envisioned it.
Yeah, I think just the conversation it allowed and the people that met each other through it and have and continue to this day. Some have come, some have gone. You know, another thing with the message boards, generally the discourse has been very civil. You know, it's been very people have learned to police
Yes.
the boards, and usually if some bandit comes in there and acts like an idiot, they get run out pretty quick. Now, every now and then, you've had to come in and some others with a heavy hand to say, look, I got to block you because you just can't do that. It hasn't happened all that often, but
No.
have you been pretty impressed with the level of civility of conversation for all these years on the message board, which is now like 23, 24 years old?
Yeah, I'm super happy with it. Obviously, you know, if you go back to 1998 or something like that, you could register. You didn't have to give an email address when you registered as Titan Q back in 1998 or whatever year you started up at. And so we kind of generally, gradually added, you know, more of those things that make some people make it just provides a little more accountability, right? And there were times, and probably not in the last, I have to look down at the calendar. Maybe not in the last 15 years, I guess, but there were obviously times where it was a little more wild, wild west. But it has been great. Yeah, it's the community is very self-policing. People who you know, who haven't read the room, as it were, and come in and kind of spout off. It almost never is something that I have to deal with, because it's almost always something that someone else who's already a member of the community is kind of, as you said, self-police. And that's the best part about it, is that you know, it used to take a lot of my time, and now I can just come in and read it, and I don't generally have to moderate it or administrate it. And, you know, it's a good source of intel and knowledge for those of us who run the sites as well.
And it's been funny to me over the years to hear coaches say that they stay away from it and they don't read it, because a second later you'll hear them reference, you know, and then, you know, they'll just say randomly in an interview, and, you know, people are always saying about our strength of schedule. Well, where are they saying that? They're saying it on the d3hoops.com message board. Yeah. I think about 99.9% of coaches regularly read it, or at some point have read it. There's one here or there that's super old school that just refused to and didn't care. But that's always been a funny factor to me. And I think you would agree that most coaches, that when you really dig in, they're paying attention to it.
And if they're not, then one of their assistant coaches is reading it and telling everybody in the office exactly what is being said. Either.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Let's talk about your staff a little bit, and because this is important. I think that people know that this isn't like a 20-person organization where everyone's making $1 million a year and there's huge benefits. Let's talk about each of the members of your team currently and the role that they play. I first want to start with Gordon Mann, who's your senior editor. Gordon's been around a long, long time doing this. Talk about the role that Gordon plays.
Yeah, I mean, Gordon, in all honesty, Gordon is our point person primarily, first off, on women's basketball. So, you know, any of our women's basketball national coverage, any of our women's basketball awards, all of our coverage at wherever the Final Four site is for women's basketball in any given year. I mean, Gordon is running that, and has been for many, many years, has been our point person on women's basketball. When I took my year and a half sabbatical, whenever that was, maybe 17, 18, 19, something like that, Gordon basically ran the entire site as much as possible. It is very difficult. It is impossible basically for one person to do all of the back end stuff on the site. So he and I basically split all of that. There's a ton of back end stuff that has to be done every off season, and then a bunch of it that has to be done on game day and in March to put the news out there, to keep the scoreboard running, to keep team pages updated and that sort of thing. Gordon came to us. Which is how I think everybody has reached out to us, because it's hard to just go randomly recruit people. And this would have been 99 or something like that. He graduated from Trinity College up in Hartford, Connecticut, and the women's Final Four was in Danbury, and which is in Connecticut also. And he just kind of emailed out of the blue, having been a broadcaster as a student at Trinity, and said, "Hey, do you guys need any help?" And I am glad to have you go to the women's Final Four. And I think at the time, this is how long ago this was, I think my idea was for him to be cutting tape. Literally, and I don't know if I was literally envisioning that he would be, just so you would take an X-Acto knife and cut the tape. So this is like a cassette for those of you who don't know what we're talking about. It's like a cassette tape, and you would cut it and literally splice it with a piece of tape and piece together highlights. That was what I had in mind. I don't remember if that's how it actually ended up. And then, he has basically been with us ever since, because to be honest with you, if not for Gordon, we don't have a d3hoops.com right now. I would have had to have pulled the plug on it a long time ago, because it's basically impossible for one person to do it. He is the other one person. And also I should really point out too, that in November and December, when I'm the 1A, or I'm the one person, the point person on D3 football. So when football playoffs are going on for those 5 weeks, I have very little time to devote to d3hoops.com, and Gordon is basically running the site lock, stock, and barrel at that time as well.
And that's at a critical time, because it's the beginning of the basketball season. So the role
there's some stuff going on. Yeah.
There's some stuff going on.
I will at that time of year, I will be doing the men's basketball top 25. I'll be coordinating that. I'll be doing men's basketball preseason awards with some of the other members of our team, but Gordon is doing the rest of it.
Let's go to staff member number 2. These are in no particular order. Maybe one of the most visible members of the staff is Mr. Dave McHugh,
Yep.
who I've known almost as long as you. Met Dave a few years after you, but Dave obviously is your broadcast director, and people know him as the host of Hoopsville. Talk through the role that Dave has played on the network for all these years.
Yeah, Dave's role has started Hoopsville not as a part of the network. Dave went to Goucher, which is a rival of my alma mater, Catholic. We had some memorable battles in men's basketball when I think Dave might have still been a student and I was a very young alum. And his show kind of gradually sort of is brought into d3hoops.com. It's still his show. He owns it. He does it. He's solely responsible for its content, as we would say. But obviously, yeah. I mean, Dave is is the visible ambassador for Division III and the visible ambassador for d3hoops.com. He is out front. Gordon and I are doing all the work. No. Dave is out front. He's the guy who talks to coaches a lot more than I ever have time to anymore. More than Gordon does. That sort of thing. It is very important. From that regard, when we were doing a ton of NCAA broadcasts ourselves, come tournament time, Dave would be front and center on a lot of that too, just coordinating stuff, making sure people had the audio clips or the access rights or the whatever that we would do if we were doing. We did a very short time where we actually did video broadcasts before the NCAA just kind of stepped in and took all of that over. So, and, also at the d3hoops.com Classic, where we have, anywhere from 12 to 20 teams in Las Vegas at the end of December every year. Dave is producing those broadcasts as well. It's just very, it's a good, different style of flow of content, right? Gordon and I are very text focused for people who are coming on a browser or on the mobile device. Dave is very much in the streaming realm. And then, he and I are both on Twitter, and he and I may both be on the D3 Hoops handle at any given time. Dave's role is very nebulous and it's hard to describe. And I just spent a lot of time not super describing it well, but he's also, because he talks to coaches all the time, it's like, if we get heads up on things, it's because Dave has been generally beating the bushes looking for information. So
Yeah,
that's kind of the basics there.
Hoopsville's become extremely popular over the years, and it's something that people kind of have count on to learn what's going on all across the landscape. It's a really good mixture of men's basketball and women. It's a good mixture of the regions. The balance has been outstanding,
Yeah.
and it's just really become a fixture over the course of. I mean, is Hoopsville 18 years old, something like that?
Well, there was a Hoopsville in 2001. Um, and then there were a couple years of hiatus in between there, but yeah, I mean, there's probably about 18 years of Hoopsville sounds about right.
I think it's about
I
right.
guess, and I suppose we have to consider last year a hiatus as well, but for goodness sakes, there's an asterisk on everything associated with 2020, 21. So, there you go.
And then probably the newest member of the team, but someone that plays a critical role is Ryan Scott, who's your columnist. So he would write around the nation, et cetera. Talk a little bit about Ryan's role.
Ryan is great. We're very happy to have him. He just kind of, again, kind of came to us, kind of bubbled up out of nowhere, so to speak. It's very important for us, even though where we get our clicks and where we get the ad revenue that sustains the website is all from the data. It's all top 25. It is all daily scoreboard. It is all team pages, conference standings, that sort of thing. All of that is dynamically generated from the content and the data that is in the database. But we are all journalists, and we feel that it is absolutely a requirement to have news coverage on the website, and then to have a feature columnist, and he does feature columns, and he does analytical columns, right, which is super great. He's a very good. He's very good at both of those things, which is awesome because it's good to have someone who can do both. So, I mean, I don't even remember how long Ryan has been the Around the Nation columnist, because in my head, I still feel like it's 2016 or something like that. And there's a long string of people. There's Mark Simon, and then there's a long string of people, and then there's Ryan. And Ryan's anchoring that spot for us, and it's great. And it's not just that. So Ryan does that column every week, but when there's two other key things that Ryan does behind the scenes, and hopefully I'm not giving away any of the secret sauce by saying that Ryan primarily chooses our team of the week, which is our weekly honor roll, which is good because that gets me an extra hour of sleep on Monday nights, or maybe 2 hours of sleep that I don't have to deal with that. And he also is like the guy who cleans up the scoreboard. So we have, all of the Division III schools have access to post their scores on D3 hoops and D3 football, and D3 baseball, and not all of them do, unfortunately. And so at the end of the night or first thing the next morning, Ryan is the guy generally who's going to go and say, okay, so we don't have this score from RPI versus Union, or we don't have this score from throw two schools under the bus right now, let's say Wartburg and Nebraska Wesleyan or something like that, right? Whatever it is, we don't have those scores, and probably 30 other scores. He's going to go out and find those and plug them in, and he keeps the database super current, and that is invisible to almost everybody that except for those of us on the team. So I have to shout that out because that's super important to me.
Yeah, and just a quick PSA here is just for anyone that might be listening is if you're one of those schools that's not reporting your scores, that's causing unnecessary work to some folks that don't necessarily have the time. I mean, is it fair to say that there's some simple things that people could be doing to make your lives better and the content better if people would all just the part of the post-game wrap-up process is to put the scores in there? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be like 60 seconds worth of work to put in the score and a box score. It would be maybe, and that's really, I think that's true for if you have both a men's and women's basketball game in a night. It would probably be about another minute or so to copy and paste in your game story. I assume that most schools are already still writing game stories in whatever format they deem works for their audience. All that stuff is right there to copy and paste. And I beg you, please. It would make it so much easier. It would make it a better resource for everybody. It's, I understand that you want people to come to your site as an SID, and that's great. We expect people will want to do that too, right? I mean, we don't have your roster. We don't have your stats per se, your team stats, that sort of thing. We don't have your coaches' bios. People are still going to come to your sites for that. But I kind of consider us like the Associated Press in this regard. It is a collective where people feed information in and then it gets spread out. And that's exactly the kind of thing we want to do. You would send your story to the Associated Press, I assume, if you were an SID. So just take the 60 seconds, copy and paste it onto our site. We don't even edit it. It just goes straight live. That is what better way? Let's just talk SEO for a second. What better way to search engine optimize around your search terms than to put your content on another site?
Spoken like a true marketer and social media guy, and very crafty. And the other thing I'll say about all this is there's a misconception with some that there is like this staff and it's full time. And I can't tell you how many times people have said, you know, like, how many people work there, and you know, how much do they get paid? And so the reason that you should take the 60 seconds to put the box score and the scoring and all that is because we're working here with a volunteer army, guys. Like we truly are. You got a group of people that, hey, if the website makes enough money to cover the expenses to get to the Final Four and stuff, that's obviously great. But you got people that are spending their own time. And so if you can please help them from having to spend more of their own time, that allows, I think, the site to continue on successfully. If it gets to a point where it's not sustainable, that's when things blow up. That's just me talking. But please, 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 if you are watching this and you're not putting your scores in, or there's someone that you know is not, send this little link to them and just say, could you listen to the last 5 minutes of this, please? Moving on, Pat, I just want to talk a little bit about the balance that you guys have maintained in men's and women's. I think this has been something that you have really done a great job of. And I just wanted, was this an intentional thing? Your coverage between men and women has been so balanced over the years. Did you seek that out? Did you say when you started the site, this can't just be a men's basketball thing? We have to have coverage of both genders. Talk through that a little bit.
Yes, that is 100% intentional from the get-go. You know, it's not quite 50%, 50%, but you know, our audience is probably about 75% men's basketball, 25% women's basketball.
Right.
We don't go that far. We probably, I would say, if someone were to do an analysis of what is on the front page or what is in Ryan's column, that's probably about 60-40. And I feel that's pretty equitable. I hope that people, I haven't really heard in a long time women's basketball coaches, which would be a very important audience for this sort of thing. I haven't heard them say that, you know, we're not doing enough to cover the women's basketball game. So I really hope that people do think that we are doing what you say we are. I feel happy that I appreciate you saying that. It was, you know, as I said, that was one of the things I bugged Steve Ulrich about way back in like 1996 or something like that. His website was basically a collection of links to men's basketball programs and, you know, 3 or 4 top stories, and that was about it. And it didn't seem right to me. You know, it was always the intent for us that we cover men's and women's basketball, that we devote about the same amount of resources to both of them. Gordon takes this very seriously. Gordon is very serious about our coverage of women's basketball. And, you know, I hope that it shows. I'm glad that you think that it does. It's very important.
I think all the content platforms that is there, whether it's the around the nation, around the region, Hoopsville has done an amazing job of that balance between men's and women's. That's something I've noticed honestly from almost day one. And you're right that the audience might skew a little more percentage wise, or a lot more men's versus women's. But what it's done is, I mean, just from my standpoint, like it's helped me become more of a women's basketball fan because I can follow it better. Like I know the story with Hope or Amherst or whoever that is, and now I'm more apt to go watch those games. If you were not covering that to the degree, there would be less women's basketball fans, and that's a bad thing. So I think the balance has been a huge thing. I want to ask you, Pat, a little bit about just your travels. At some point after you got this cooking and there was the message board and people are talking, you kind of started to get on the road a little bit. I just remember going way back to like 1999, 2000. You came to Illinois Wesleyan. I remember this because you took photos of Corey Kuhn. I remember that. So I
With
put
the
myself,
kids.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
with Corey's kids back in 2000.
How old? Corey's kids are in their 30s now, right?
Well, one of them just graduated 2 years ago from playing at Elon, and the other one from graduating from Illinois Wesleyan, Tyler Sebring and
Okay,
Trevor
so like
Sebring.
25 or 26 or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
they right. So
Yeah.
Corey's kids have now played
Wow.
college basketball, which is pretty amazing. But you really you traveled the country visiting Division III schools, both basketball and then getting into football.
Yep.
It's had to be a lot of fun seeing
Yeah.
all these campuses and meeting all these people.
It has been. That's been one of the things that I've really enjoyed about this. I didn't know per se that, when this started that I would be able to travel, that, traveling requires money. Traveling requires time away from my family. I had a very young family at the time. Um, and, I was getting in the car with Ray Martell, a buddy of mine from college, who was a big part of the startup of the site. As you say, I think this particular trip was January or February of 2000 or so. We start from DC. We go up to Pittsburgh, where the WashU women's team is playing at Carnegie Mellon to tie. I no longer remember who held the record before WashU did, and obviously know that UConn does now. I think I actually they were trying to tie maybe UCLA's men's record or the college basketball record. Anyway, they were going for their 61st consecutive win. So we get in the car in February and we drive to Pittsburgh, and we broadcast that game on whatever, I don't even remember what it was back then. And then we get back in the car. We stop for the night outside of Cleveland, where Kevin Rupel, the Baldwin Wallace SID, very kindly got us a hotel room. That was very nice. We weren't even there to cover his team. But he got us a place somewhere out in the Cleveland suburbs, and we got back in the car the next morning and continued out to Bloomington, Illinois, where Wheaton was playing Illinois Wesleyan. And obviously, this is something that the message board community did as well, right? They made people aware of what the quality of basketball was, and then also that the Shirk Center was this thing that we had to see. And yeah, it turns out it was this thing that we had to see, and it was packed, as it had been for many, many nights, and would continue to be for many, many more nights afterwards. And it was a great game, and I still think about Corey Kuhn and Luke Moo, and I still occasionally run across those photos in my office, and that sort of thing. So it was that trip, and then like I did a trip of like 4 or 5 stops in Texas one year.
The Tour de
like
Texas.
the Tour de Tejas, yes. And then the Southern Hospitality Tour, which was I can do this. There was I was at Oglethorpe and LaGrange and Birmingham Southern, kind of those South Atlantic states. And then I did one in the Boston area. I always kind of wanted to do meandering across Michigan or wandering through Wisconsin or something like that. I always feel like there's a trip to be done, like just to Milwaukee, and like an hour's radius of Milwaukee, there's like 6 D3
Right.
schools, or maybe even more in that area. Um, Obviously being on the road and driving days at a time is a little bit different here in the upper Midwest than it was when I lived in the mid-Atlantic, or driving through Texas, or driving through the South Atlantic states, that sort of thing. I'm not as eager to drive on the highways in February as I used to be. But those were fun, and there's some football trips that are pretty similar. And yeah, it's just great to get to see people, put faces with names, just understand what the challenges are on each campus, right? You see maybe pictures, or you see pictures of a gymnasium, or now you see it on a live stream. It's like, okay, yeah, that looks pretty normal. But then you see kind of the behind the scenes around it, and you really get this bigger picture of what the athletic department is about, what the school is about, and it just helps. It helps with perspective. I mean, you could say that, of course, about travel in any way, shape, or form, but it definitely helps with my perspective of understanding the Division III landscape, to know that LaGrange is like XYZ school, and Clark
Right.
in Worcester, Mass is like this other school, and that sort of thing.
You mentioned broadcast, and that's been a very central part of this whole D3sports.com experience from the get-go.
I miss
Uh,
it. I miss it a lot.
I'm sure, I know that that is where your passion is, and you guys were really out in front of, like today, literally any Yahoo can get themselves a little show going if they want to, or find a way to broadcast something wherever they want. At the time, it was a little different. You know, at the time, in a very part-time capacity, I was working for a commercial radio station as the color guy for Illinois Wesleyan, working with Art Kimball, who
Art
you
Kimball.
remember, the late Art
Yep.
Kimball. And so, you know, broadcasting over the air on WJBC.com in that case. But you guys really were kind of on the front edge of that movement that was happening, where people could find a way to broadcast things over the internet, over a
Yeah.
stream. And I just remember so many instances of you guys doing games. I remember Pat at Lawrence,
Pat Cummings. Yep.
Pat Cummings at Lawrence doing the Illinois Wesleyan Lawrence sectional there. And
Yep.
that's really been an important part of what you guys have done, is being broadcasters. Would you agree with that, Pat?
It was definitely a huge part of everything we did, like in the 2000s or so, or from about 2003 to maybe 2011 or 2012, something like that. For part of that span, we were like essentially the official NCAA.com broadcast
Right.
stream of a lot of NCAA tournament games. For a subset of that time, the NCAA actually paid us a very small amount of money, but an amount of money nonetheless, to provide streams of games, to provide neutral streams of games, right?
Right.
You know, you and Art did a great job, but there are lots of broadcasts that are super slanted towards the team that
Yeah.
they're obviously rooting for and or broadcasting. And I can think of one that's not very far from Illinois Wesleyan right
Straight
now. Is
south.
a little bit, yes. It comes to mind. I don't know if I blew anything by saying that, but you know, there are, you know, so the point is you come in and provide a neutral broadcast and kind of add to the coverage, add to the experience. I thought it was a good experience for the student athletes and for the coaches, because, you know, then we would be the, you know, the people at the end who would walk down there with a wireless mic and ask one question before they go off to the locker room, kind of thing, which is, if nothing else, doesn't happen in D3 all that often, and prepares you for doing it in a national championship scenario, right? But that was just, it was a lot of fun. And there were times where, you know, at the peak of this, we probably had 6 to 8 broadcast crews out there on any
Yeah.
given night in the tournament. And, you know, people at Lawrence, people at Stevens Point, people at Ursinus, people at, you know, Southern Vermont. Mark Simon and I were talking not that long ago about some memorable snowy night in a first round game at Southern Vermont, where, you know, there were 500 people in a 300 seat gymnasium or something like that. Those, like, you know, that basically an 8-9 game if we had seatings, right? Awesome atmospheres, awesome experiences. That was a lot of fun. And I definitely came up as a broadcaster. If you had asked me at age 15 what I wanted to do with my life, would be to be a Major League Baseball broadcaster. Now, some of the people who have done D3 Hoops games are Major League Baseball broadcasters. Like Joe Davis is the poster child for this.
The Dodgers
he's the voice of the Dodgers. Yeah, he replaced Vin Scully. I did the Wash U Augustana game with him when it was #1 versus #2 in like 2009, 2010. I don't even remember.
Wayne Randazzo, who's with the Mets, right?
Yeah, Wade Randazzo's with the Mets. John Sadak wasn't part of our team, but he was a contemporary of ours at Rowan, and he's the television voice of the Cincinnati Reds.
Right.
And I am forgetting somebody, and that's unfortunate, because there's somebody else too whose name is just not.
But a high quality of personnel that has come through there and helped, again, kind of the volunteer army. And did things change? Because remember, at the point we're talking about here, there wasn't video streams, period. A lot of schools, some schools had a radio broadcast like Illinois Wesleyan did, where maybe that was starting to be streamed, possibly, but there was no video. And so people leaned on your crew to go provide coverage of some huge, Wittenberg-Worcester game or something like that.
Yeah.
And then there came a point where like for me, I think Wheaton College in Illinois was the first CCIW school that had a video stream. Like, holy cow, I can watch this game. Now, literally everyone has a video stream. They most have a broadcast crew, whether professional or students. Yep. And so I guess the demand for what you were doing back then just kind of shrunk very quickly because of the accessibility of all this other stuff. Is that correct?
It is, and there's like an interim step in there too, is like when the world was moving to video, even before a lot of schools had it, it was not nearly as easy for us to go put a video crew together and go out
Right.
and do things. And also just to know that you had the bandwidth courtside to actually produce something like that. We would be, we could uh, ostensibly show up somewhere and find out that you couldn't actually connect at a high enough speed to push out a viable video product. So, yeah, I mean, I still think there's value in it. I think there's value in having that neutral voice on games. And I'm very happy whenever Dave McHugh is doing the semifinals and the national championship game with the folks at Turner for NCAA.com. But yeah, I mean, those things are just not things that,
Yeah.
as we have, as the world has evolved, as your term volunteer army, I think I'm going to take and keep using because that's really what it is. We're just choosing to focus our energies elsewhere. It takes a lot of time to put those things together, and that's time we would be taking away from operating the scoreboard or whatever needs to be done on game night.
In the first 4 years of this adventure that you've been on, I can vividly remember being with you in Salem, Virginia, for a weekend where the four teams participating were Catholic, Ohio Northern, Illinois Wesleyan, and William Patterson. And obviously, your alma mater comes to the Final Four and comes out of there with the national championship. Certainly on paper going into that, not the favorite to do so. That has to be one of your most memorable things. It didn't have to do with running the site, but just your Division III experience as you look back on that national championship. Pretty incredible, huh?
An amazing moment or a set of moments, kind of the end of an amazing run. I remember talking with Mike Lonergan, who was the men's basketball coach at Catholic at the time, doing our pregame interview, which I, had done for, two other Final Fours with, 8 other coaches. And then at the end of it, turning off the tape because it was a tape recording. And then he said, man, I just don't want to come out of here 0-2. And I'm like thinking, yeah, I don't want, and I think that's very possible. We could come out of here 0-2. Like William Patterson had our number. Ohio Northern was the number 1 team in the other poll, and I think number 3 in ours. And Illinois Wesleyan was Illinois Wesleyan. I was like, who of these teams is Catholic going to beat? And then they're down. In my head, I think they are down 12 with 8 to go against Ohio Northern in the semifinals, and they've and in my head. I have to go back to the box score, but in my head, I'm sure it's Pat Maloney gets hot. Although I know his big shots were in the championship game, that sort of thing. And Catholic claws back into it, ends up winning that game. At some point, I think at the under 8 or the under 4, I am just hyperventilating, trying to keep it together as the game is getting close again. And Rick Seidel, who's alongside me, is like, take it easy, just relax, just breathe, right? And then the next night was great. It's like, because even though Catholic hadn't beaten William Patterson before and hadn't beaten Horace Jenkins, I mean, we knew them. We knew Horace Jenkins, we knew Ray Ortiz, we knew 3 other people who I can't name right now. But there was some confidence that you could actually win that game, especially because they had beaten your alma mater. And turned out, of course, to be a great 3rd place game between Illinois Wesleyan and Ohio Northern, probably the championship game we all had expected. And then the nightcap, those 2 schools from the east side of the bracket actually coming through and playing a great national championship game. I was much more in the moment, enjoying it, having fun. And then when Pat Maloney hit that 26-footer with about, I don't know, 2:03 to go or something like that to make it an 8-point game, is like, oh, the rest of this is just going to be celebrating and just going to see seniors hit free throws and stuff like that. It was a fantastic experience. I think I definitely understand now, but I think I understood that was a magical thing that might not be repeatable. Catholic had been to this round of 16 multiple years in a row. I think they'd been to the round of 8 the year before and lost to Franklin and Marshall. But we knew that was super difficult, and we were graduating 5 seniors who had won 100 games in their career, and it was not guaranteed to continue. And then, Lonergan left for a job as an assistant coach at Maryland, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot of those things that even though they happened 20 years ago, I remember them as vividly as if they had happened just this past March,
And
which
I
is
think,
more than I could say for maybe some of the things that happened in 2017 or 2015
right.
for that matter.
And I remember after your alma mater won the national championship, I think we all ended up back. We were staying at the same hotel there in Roanoke, and the Catholic didn't come there expecting to have some huge victory celebration. Maybe had some corner of the bar, and
Yeah.
Illinois Wesleyan had this huge conference room, and so you kind of came and joined us for a little bit.
And you introduced me to Jack Sigma, for example.
And you met Jack Sigma, and we were hanging out, and just one of those incredible D3 weekends where even the team that lost the heartbreaker the night before and the folks that won it end up together. Those are some of my favorite Division III moments. Is I remember in 1996 after Illinois Wesleyan loses to Rowan in that heartbreaker, just all the camaraderie between the fans at the hotel afterwards, just
Nice.
so many cool things like that. I want to ask
I have one other post-game party I'm going to throw out. This was in the round of 16 in 1998. This was at Wilkes, and that sectional was Catholic, Wilkes, Hunter College, and I think Rowan. And the Catholic and Hunter game went to double overtime. And the Wilkes and Rowan game went to overtime, and then there's like three schools. Everybody other than Wilkes, I guess, is back at the same hotel in Wilkes-Barre and having the exact same sort of thing. Great memories of those sorts of things too. I think especially maybe in my 20s rather than in my 40s.
Yeah,
that's not even true. That's not even true. I'm sorry. I'm going to cut you off once again on your show. But think about just hanging out with all the Oshkosh people in Fort Wayne, right? And
just two years ago,
right? Jack Flynn with a inflatable cast or whatever and a red cup, right?
And the net.
After the game, and the net. Yes, exactly. Great times.
Just a few more. Are you still good on time? I got a few more things I want to cover. Are you good on time?
I have no more day job meetings today, but don't tell them someone will probably book a meeting for me.
Just a few more things. Is the All-American team started in 1997 and 98, and it has become the premier Division III. To me, it's the only Division III All-American team that people refer to. When they say that so and so is an All-American. Did you know when you created that, how much that would end up meaning to people in Division III to be named a D3Hoops.com All-American, or was it just like, hey, we really need to do this? What was the thought going into the All-American team versus where it's turned out?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. First off is we absolutely have to do this. We had to have national awards. We had already done, I think we started weekly awards basically right off the bat, and to have an All-American team was exactly something that a publication should do, right? Now, I will say, of course, the NABC also has an All-American team. It's very well respected, but it's different, right? And I see you shaking your head. We have had this conversation offline many times and online a couple of times as well, right? It's 8 people on a team. There's 3 teams, and it's always one player from each region on each team. It's no, our teams and everywhere across the D3sports.com network is it always has to be a team that you can actually put out there to play an actual game. So in this case, it's 5 guys per team. We're not going to play. We might play 5 guards because that's kind of the way the game is going right now. But it might be four guards and a big of some sort, a power forward, 4 guards and a power forward maybe is what basketball is right now. But it was never going to be, a team that a coach could not put out on the floor. That was always our philosophy. It always will be our philosophy. If a coach can only put 5 players on the floor, why is the coach's All-American team putting 8 on their first team? It's tough to make decisions, but you have to make decisions in order for your awards to be in, I hate to say valid, because valid is a very specific word that has a specific meaning, but for it to be legitimate is not a great word for it either, but I think you get the picture.
Yeah. And not to take too many shots at the NABC's team, but a couple years ago, obviously Ben Boots deserved to be a first team All-American on any team, but because he was in the Central region, Aston Francis wasn't a first teamer, right? That, to me, that's when okay, your All-American team is flawed, and I appreciate that you're doing it, but it's just not set up right. And yeah, clearly the D3hoops.com All-American team has become the gold standard. It's really
Well, thank
great
you.
that you recognize the different positions. That's been huge for me because like all conference teams, you typically don't. Like the CCIW all conference team could be 7 guards,
Yeah.
and probably sometimes it is. But I love that yours recognizes that there are different specialties, and you can't, it's apples to apples in how you kind of compare statistics and things.
Yeah.
Like you can have a first team All-American big guy at the forward center spot. Maybe his or her numbers are like 12 points a game, 10 rebounds. Whereas a guard, typically it's probably going to be a high scoring person. And I love that your team recognizes the differences. Even point guards, like you guys have done a good job of having like a low scoring, maybe not low, but maybe like 10 points a game, a point guard that is a floor general, that when
Yeah.
you watch the team, you say that is the best player on the floor. That's the most valuable player. Your team allows that to happen, which is pretty cool.
And we've, and with that, and I agree, that is very intentional on our part too. But with that also, we've evolved with the times, right? If you go back to older ones in the 90s and the early aughts, it's going to be guard, guard, forward, forward, center. And like, you can't get 5 centers who are, who are really all-American status anymore. And I don't think you can get, maybe necessarily, you can't limit yourself to 10 guards, right? That's just not the way the game is played anymore. But it's always going to be something like that. We always want to have a guy who distributes. We always want to have a guy who rebounds. We always kind of want to have a guy who slashes to the basket. We want to have a guy who shoots a bunch of threes. And that leaves us one guy to play with. And I think that's what a coach would do too. And that's kind of what the philosophy we've chosen allows us to do.
Couple of years later, after you start the All-American team, I think 2 seasons later, 99, 2000, you start the top 25, which again, another thing that has become the gold standard. Anyone who references Division III teams and what they're ranked is referencing your poll. Same kind of question. When you created that top 25 poll, did you envision it becoming the Division III basketball poll?
In this instance, I can definitely say yes. As you said, we kind of hung back in the weeds a little bit. We read the room. We watched what the NABC poll was about. They had a top 20 at the time, and the WBCA, it was either 20 or 25 for women's basketball. The men's basketball poll was almost exactly like their All-America team. Is like, here are the teams who are ranked by the NCAA regional poll. And so you have to include every number one somewhere in your top 10. And there were a bunch of rules and stuff around that. And it did not produce a reasonable ranking for us. I came from having been at USA Today into this. I came from having watched especially closely the way the college baseball, the Division I college baseball poll was put together, because that guy worked like 2 seats over from me. And it was everything that we have done in terms of making sure that the voters have all the information, which is not something that was not something that was easily done in the 90s. Making sure that the voter balance is balanced across regions, that sort of thing. All of that is what I learned by watching the D1 baseball poll in action. So, whereas, if you're not providing people with context, if you're not providing people with the data, you might not get a great voting result from them. But if you say, it was like, okay, here are, let's say there's 42 or so teams in consideration at any particular time, heavy consideration. Here's everything they did the past week. Here's what they have coming up next. So you get an idea of, if they have big games on the schedule, maybe you want to wait for them. Here's what they did, like maybe the previous 4 to 6 weeks, or in some cases, maybe the entire season, right? Here is all of that context. Here's the record of all of those teams they've faced. Here's whether the game was home or away. We used to do a lot more in terms of like, also XYZ guy was hurt for 2 games and that sort of thing. And that was somewhat helpful, but it's not as much, it isn't important anymore. I think that we have to provide that to them. A lot of those things are generally known by a coach or a voter who's on Twitter, for example. But that is the sort of, that's the context that we provided. We really wanted to make it as good a poll as possible. Obviously understanding that it's basketball, it is a sport. Nobody is going to be watching all of those games in any given week, except maybe Ryan Scott. And, nobody's going to be able to go and say, well, this team has a favorable matchup at the 2 spot against this team, and so therefore I'm going to pick them, right? That just doesn't happen at the D3 level, and there's not a lot of cross conference play or a lot of cross region play, especially in basketball, and it makes it difficult. But that is our goal. Our goal was to have a kick-ass top 25 in men's and women's basketball.
And
And
to
we
this,
waited, and in
yeah.
football we did it too. We waited several years in football before starting one as well, and make sure we did it right.
And to this day, I mean, people wait there on Mondays for that poll to come out, because even it's kind of like the people who say they don't read the chat boards. Even the people that say they don't care about polls, they care about polls. When you're talking about a team that's, I'm thinking back to this past season, the shortened season, Pacific Lutheran, a team looking to get ranked for the first time, being a vote away.
Yeah.
It's
This was such a strange year for the poll too.
It was a strange year to vote in it. It was hard to figure out. It was hard in so many ways.
It was hard for us to figure out how many teams we should have in the poll in any given week.
Like how to figure out when the season ended, right? Like,
yes.
You're sending out ballots saying, please vote as if this is the last poll, because it might be. I'm like, all right, I better take this one seriously. And it turned out to be the last one. So thank God I did. Yeah. But it is a big deal to people. Another topic here, Pat, I wanted to ask you about as we kind of start to wind down, the changing landscape of media and what that means for what you guys do and what you have. If we think back to 1997, d3hoops.com, espn.com, pgatour.com. I mean, having a website that people would go to and there'd be content there, mostly written, was the thing.
Yep.
Boy, if we look at where we are today, dynamic content and video and social, and you mentioned earlier, it's really hard for people to make a living as a journalist anymore. Print media, we could have a whole show about that. What does that mean for you guys? And we're going to get into the finances, because I want to make sure people know how to contribute to all of this before we finish.
Appreciate that.
I'm more just thinking strategically, though, before we get into the finance part. What does it mean for you as the publisher, the editor of d3sports.com, with where everything has gone and is today?
I think the goal still for a journalistic enterprise is to be a source of information and a clearinghouse of information. So is it, what format does that take? Maybe it just takes the form of a link to a box score on the website, or a link to a video stream that's in process somewhere else, or a list of bullet points to the key things that happened last night, or whatever. I still think from a publisher standpoint, there has to be a platform on which this stuff lives. Right. It can't just live in the ether. It can't just live on, a fleet or something like that. Right. I can tell you how I feel about fleets that goes away after 24 hours, or even a tweet that, is there in your feed for like 0.75 seconds and you've gone on. There needs to be a place where that stuff lives and is accessible and is archivable. Like, we have all of this data back to 2006-07. I think every game, every result is there. And maybe at some point I had thoughts about expanding it backwards, because I have some data from older years. I don't know what the return on investment is on that right now. But the thing is, obviously, is just about evolving with how people are engaging with content. Oh, now you are definitely pulling in my corporate com side of the brain right now. How are people engaging with the content? What type of engagements are they making? Are they staying on the website? Do they bounce? All of those things. But those are important for us too, right? How do you get people there? How do you get people interested? What's valuable to a publisher? Obviously, what's valuable to a publisher in a lot of ways is what allows an ad to fire, for lack of a better term. And please don't block our ads. That's super helpful. We're not trying to, we only make money if those ads actually show, and it is like fractions of a penny per ad banner. So if you're an ad blocker, please unblock them for D3 hoops, D3 football, D3 baseball, D3 sports.
And Pat, when you talk about strategically kind of still needing a home base for content and things, I'm going to ask people that are watching this to think about it from a consumer standpoint. I mean, I think of literally every day at some point, I go to d3hoops.com and something comes in my head and I need to go to teams, Great Lakes region, Wittenberg, Rock.
Region
Like,
7.
yeah, so that's my home base
Yeah.
for all things. The scoreboard, figuring out who's playing who. I want people to think about this is if you're looking to see who's playing who and there's no d3hoops.com, what's your plan? You're going to pull up 400 websites and figure out who's playing who. Is that the plan? Top 25. If you want to know who the best teams are in the country, quick snapshot. What's your game plan? You're going to go to the NCAA Division III stats page and sort by record. Is that the game plan? If you want to have a conversation with other people from Division III, whether it be your conference or your region, and there's no d3hoops.com, what's your plan? You're going to go to Twitter and just hope to follow all the right people and hope that. My point being, I've thought about this long and hard. Ever since about a year ago or whenever that was, you guys kind of put out what I'll call a plea. It was and I'm going to call it that because the words you used were to help us keep the lights on.
Yeah.
We need some help. The pandemic had impacted hits and views and all that. And I started thinking to myself, if I was trying to follow Division III and you guys just turned off the lights and went away, I thought through all the logistical things that I use every day that would be gone, which everyone else watching this uses the same stuff. They're maybe just not thinking through it quite as clearly.
Yeah.
It would be a devastating loss because it's not like, Pat, in the last 24 years, some competitors come and started d3basketball.com and has all the same stuff.
Yeah.
This is it, guys. This is what we have. This is the premier Division III coverage. So with that, Pat, the financial side of this, I know that you guys continue to need support. You created something on the Patreon platform, which I have contributed to, will continue to push people there. What do you
Appreciate
need?
that. Thank you, by the way.
What do you need to keep this thing running successfully?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So we set, I set a goal when I was thinking about Patreon, but I'm going to take a bigger zoom picture back at finances for the whole thing for a second. Like you talked about, a couple of questions ago about, the amount of money and people might be getting paid and what the staffing is and that sort of thing. Like the entire budget for all of the websites, and that is serving up the website, that is paying people a very minimal amount, but a non-zero amount to write. It is traveling to games, that sort of thing. That whole thing is like $80,000 for D3 football, D3 hoops, D3 baseball, and then, a small amount of that to kind of cover the umbrella on the d3sports.com side.
So you've just dispelled the rumor that Dave McHugh makes $1 million and has a huge 401k match. That can't be true if I just did the math correctly.
I mean, I'm not a financial analyst, but that is my understanding. Yes. I mean, that's not one full-time equivalent, right? When you put it all together, benefits and that sort of thing. Even if we didn't have to pay for anything else, that's not quite a full-time person. Maybe it is in some parts of the country, but that is what we do, everything on that money. And so, in the normal times, about 90% of that comes just plain old ad revenue. We are very fortunate that the D3 football site is very popular, and it is very popular during the fourth quarter of the year, where ad rates are at their highest, ad fill rates are at their highest. You're not getting any filler ads because everybody's trying to get you in their store for holiday shopping, right? So we're very fortunate about that. That drives about everything we do. I think if I think about the fourth quarter, it is probably about 50% of our revenue or so comes in at that time. And some of it is basketball and a small amount of it is baseball, but a bunch of it is football. And not having a football season in 2020, oddly enough, a big impact. And we didn't have to have, we didn't have all of our costs because we weren't going to games. And we weren't paying writers because we weren't writing, but there's still fixed costs for keeping the servers on and that sort of thing. And that is not insignificant in this day and age because, it takes quite a large service package for us to keep these websites on. So yeah, long story short, we have always, I have always said, and I have said this to you multiple times, is that before we pulled the plug, that we would go back and ask people for help. And we hadn't done that since like 2000 or so.
Right.
For those of you people who were around in 2000, the tech bubble, we had, we needed help to pay the bills that year too. So if we only go back to people every 20 years or so with big asks, that's great. But we really needed it because, we basically lost 93% of our traffic, and in the end we were going to lose somewhere similar to about 93% of our revenue, and we needed about 40 of it just
Right.
to get by. So like for us, we really wanted to have about the stretch goal was about 200 subscribers on Patreon, and it's been, we're in the ballpark of that, which is great. We could always use another push, and then we're hopeful that things are relatively normal in September, and then again in November and December and March, and all of, for the foreseeable future in order to keep this going. So there's a financial piece, but I got to say too, I just listed off our team. That is super, super bare bones. It is
Right.
really, operating the site. It's about 2.5 people who are doing site operations, and I really need another 2 or so, and I need another 2 on football. Like I just had big retirements in football. Keith McMillan essentially retired from d3football.com. Adam
Right.
Turr essentially retired from d3football.com. So we're hurting a little bit in the personnel department. So if you are, I don't even know how to put this pitch, because I am pitching someone who needs to have a love of the game mentality and is happy to contribute and doesn't necessarily need to get a lot of money out of it. It's something you're doing on the side. It's something you're doing because you enjoy it. Are you a former student journalist who still likes to write, and would someone who 10 years ago would have had a blog, and now maybe blogs are not as big a deal anymore? Someone who is big in pushing content on social media. We could use people on our team, is what I'm saying. And we're an hour plus into this before making this pitch. But if people are still listening, we need that just as much as we need money.
Yeah, the great thing is they tend to view this in chunks, is the way I set this up on YouTube. So you can go
it's
to
good.
a
It's great.
section. Yeah, you can get it, and so people will watch this. And I think
I always watch the whole thing basically when I'm watching it, or
impressed.
I'm generally listening to it while I'm on a walk or something.
I
like that.
appreciate that.
Nobody needs to see this for an hour and 10 minutes.
There's two asks that I'm hearing here. The first is that I'll put the Patreon info back out there, and the team can obviously use more cash. Like at the end of the day, that 80,000 operating budget is completely bare bones. It doesn't allow for anything additional that's not happening currently. So the team needs the support. If you follow Division III basketball or Division III sports in general, please consider contributing. You can contribute as little as you want per month or as much through Patreon. It's very easy to use, direct debit kind of thing, or you can make one payment if you want to. The other ask that I heard you say is there's a need for the next generation of folks to come in here and do this thing. This November I turn 50, Pat, and that means that a couple of years from now you're going to turn 50, right?
I understand you might be among the youngest in your class, and so am I. So I won't turn 49 until December, and some of my high school classmates will already be 50 by then. So
yeah,
I've been following that with a lot of joy, by the way. I really feel that.
Not aware is that when I was a November birthday, and so I was always made fun of because I didn't turn 16. I was the last guy that got my license.
Oh yeah,
I turned 21 November of my senior year at Illinois Wesleyan. I got all kinds of grief. I was so young. Well, guess what? When your boys are starting to turn 50 and you're just sitting there 49 loving life, it's a great situation. That's what Pat's referring to.
And your hair looks great, by the way. I'm sure you have better hair and you're in better shape than most of your high school classmates.
I'm trying, man. I'm grinding it out. But my point being is that, hey, look, we need that next wave of people that is passionate about this to come in. And how would someone, Pat, reach out to you? Is there an email? Is there Twitter? How would someone say, hey, I'm interested in helping in some way?
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely DM us on Twitter, D3 Hoops or D3 Football. You could email me if email is a thing, pat.coleman@d3sports.com, or almost any of the other D3 Sports addresses you find out there on email probably redirect to me at some point anyway. So Yeah, we are definitely interested in hearing from people who have portfolios would be cool. People who have written something anywhere that you can point to, and then have some. You have to come in already knowing Division 3, because we have tried that with other people before, and we have seen other people who don't have D3 expertise or passion try to start their own websites, and you know we're not talking about those anymore, but we're still here. So
And it's a
those are the two
great
people.
way to get exposure. If you're young, you're just coming out of school, it's a great way to
True.
do
I mean,
something and be published, and right.
right, and we're not going to pay you just an exposure, but yes, we,
Yeah.
yeah, we can pay a small amount, but yeah, it is right, and just to practice too, or whatever. Like if
Yes,
you
something you
wanted to
could put
live,
on your resume, right?
yeah, if you pictured having a newspaper job and weren't able to get one, we're the place for you. Would be my suggestion.
I was in a job interview a few years ago from a company that was recruiting me, and I got to the interview. I never told you this, and they said, "Hey, we watched you on that Hoopsville show." So I'm not thinking of this, right? They Google you, and so what
Yeah.
is it? Well, you put in Bob Quillman, and somewhere down the list, there's like me and Dave McHugh hashing out pool C bids or something, and and they said, you're really a good communicator, and that helped us get a feel for you in a setting where you didn't know we were watching. It was something that was like a year old or something, right? Is so
Okay.
my
Yeah.
point being here is that there's tons of good experience to be gained by joining this crew in the volunteer army, as I call it, and there's a lot in it for you as well. So it's a nice little two-way street. So Pat, wrapping this thing up here, I'll just say a few things, and then as Dave taught me, I always give the last word to the guest. I've kept that tradition. Um, we owe you a lot, Pat. I mean, what you started 23 years ago still lives on, still incredibly relevant. And I know it's taken a ton of work that none of us see behind the scenes. We see what's on the website, and we see what's on Hoopsville, and we see around the nation, we see the football site, but none of us know all the things that you have done behind the scenes. And so just from the Division 3 community, a huge thank you to you, a huge thank you to Ryan, Dave, Gordon, and all of the staff that's come and gone over the years. That whole crew that you have had, you have changed the Division 3 landscape for the better. And we hope this continues into the future. With that, I always give my guests the final word. I will turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Bob. I really appreciate this. I appreciate you having me on. I've had a lot of fun just kind of listening to / watching these shows. I've not watched all 18 of the previous ones necessarily by a stretch, but it's been, I have always wanted to do like long form interview type things and just can't manage to carve out the time to do something like that. I can't even get my time to do a football podcast at this point, let alone what you've been doing. This is crazy. So I appreciate what you have added to the Division 3 landscape by doing this and getting people's names and faces out there. And then just your support and friendship and all of that over 20 plus years in Division 3 is super helpful as well and means a lot to me. So I thank you for what you said. I think I do kind of understand how this has impacted people, even though I had no idea that was what it was going to do. It makes it possible for those of us who do it to keep doing it because it's not about the money, it's about love of the game, it's about love of Division 3, and for us it's about love of doing what we do. So those are the sorts of things that we occasionally need to hear and occasionally need to be reminded of in order to get up the the strength to do it for another season.
That is Pat Coleman, folks. He's a fine lad to have a beer with on St. Patrick's Day in towns like Roanoke and Salem and parts unknown. He's a good guy to watch a game with, broadcast a game with. Pat, thank you so much for doing this. I hope everyone will seriously consider contributing to the Patreon fundraising effort. It will really help keep this thing alive and well. Patrick, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate it.